Under a wheat field in southeastern Turkey, a discovery was buried that would tear a 6,000-year hole through everything archaeology thought it knew about the birth of civilization. For a century, historians assumed farming came first and temples came after. Göbekli Tepe proves it happened backward. In 1963, a joint survey team from two major universities walked straight over the truth and filed it away as a medieval graveyard, a mistake that stood for 30 years. It took a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt to see what they'd missed. He recognized it in a single afternoon in October 1994, and it consumed the rest of his life. He spent the next 20 years excavating that hillside and died in 2014 with the work still unfinished. This is Gobekli Tepe, a ring of carved limestone pillars, some over 5 meters tall, raised 11,600 years ago, older than pottery, older than metal, older than the wheel. Today it holds UNESCO World Heritage status. Branded by Turkish tourism as the 0 point of history, archaeologists call it the oldest known monumental architecture on Earth. Not a village, not a house, but an entire ceremonial complex built by people who, according to every accepted model of civilization, should not have had the tools or the social structure to build anything at all. For most of the 20th century, the rule was simple: learn to farm, grow a surplus, feed people who are not farmers, priests, planners, builders. Only then do you get the organized labor required to raise something like Stonehenge or Giza. Agriculture first, monuments after. Göbekli Tepe breaks that rule before you even reach the strangest part of the story. Picture the scale for a second. Circular and oval stone enclosures, each ringed with T-shaped pillars, the largest weighing as much as a loaded truck and standing taller than most single-story rooms. Some are carved with foxes, snakes, scorpions, boars, cranes, and vultures, worked into the limestone in relief so precise it looks intentional down to the claw and the feather. This has been called, only half-jokingly, prehistory's own gallery wall, a monument raised by people archaeologists used to assume were too busy surviving to build anything permanent at all. Because the 1963 survey wasn't the only failure, local farmers had been living with these stones for generations before any university took interest. They called the hill Giri Mirazan, Wish Hill, treated it as sacred ground, kept a small walled cemetery near a lone mulberry tree at its summit, and cleared oversized stone slabs out of their fields every planting season without ever knowing what they were looking at. One family, the Yildiz family, struck stone with their plow more than once and reported it to the local museum. Nobody with the right training ever came to look. For 3 decades, the most important archaeological site in the entire Fertile Crescent sat one plow strike away from discovery, cataloged once by professionals and then quietly ignored. Schmidt arrived with an advantage nobody else in 1994 had. He'd just finished a decade of work at Navali Quarry, another Neolithic site nearby, where archaeologists had already pulled T-shaped stone pillars out of the ground and confirmed them prehistoric, right before the entire site vanished under the rising waters of a new dam reservoir in 1992. Schmidt knew exactly what those shapes meant when he saw them. So, when he sat down with the old 1963 report and read a description of a hill covered in worked limestone dismissed as grave markers, something didn't sit right. He went to see it himself. "As soon as I got there and saw the stones," he said, "I knew that if I didn't walk away immediately, I would be there for the rest of my life." He didn't walk away. What he found didn't behave like an ordinary ruin. The stones weren't scattered by time and erosion. They were packed under layers of rubble, broken flint, and smashed animal bone, fill that looked less like decay and more like something deliberately dumped. Enclosure after enclosure repeated the same pattern, massive carved rings buried on purpose, as if someone had chosen to bury the temple rather than let it slowly fall apart on its own. Nearby, in a limestone quarry not far from the main site, excavators found something almost as strange as the finished pillars. An unfinished one, over 7 meters long, still half attached to the bedrock it was cut from. Whatever stopped that particular stone from being finished, it wasn't time, it was a decision. And the central pillars that did make it upright weren't blank stone. They had arms, hands resting on carved belts, the unmistakable shape of a human body, except above the shoulders where a face should be, there was nothing. No eyes, no mouth, just a flat, deliberate blank. Some researchers have floated the idea that the pillars represent ancestors or spirits, deliberately stripped of individual identity so they could stand in for anyone who needed them to. Others point to the animal carvings covering the stones, especially the fox, by far the most repeated image on the site, and argue the imagery points toward shamanic ritual, a bridge between the human world and something else entirely. No one has ever fully proven either theory. No one has fully explained why a civilization capable of carving hands and belts into stone chose every time to leave the face out. There was another detail sitting quietly underneath the excitement. In the oldest, grandest layer of the site, the one with the largest pillars, there were no fireplaces, no ordinary domestic debris, nothing that looked like a home. On the surface, that looked like exactly what Schmidt wanted it to be. A temple, not a settlement. A place people visited, not a place people lived. He summed it up in 5 words that would define the site for the next 20 years. First came the temple, then the city. Farming, in his theory, didn't create religion and monumental building. Religion and monumental building may have created the pressure that pushed hunter-gatherers toward farming in the first place. A theory that clean should have made everyone suspicious. Eventually, it did. The first hard proof came from radiocarbon dating, measuring the decay of a radioactive form of carbon inside organic material to calculate how long ago it died. It is not a guess. It is chemistry doing the counting for you. Early tests on charcoal from the site pushed the date back further than anyone expected, and a later, more critical sample, plaster scraped directly from the wall of one enclosure, locked the earliest structures into the 10th and 9th millennia BCE, not folklore. A number checked and rechecked in a lab, and that number placed the monument centuries before any confirmed farming settlement anywhere in the region. This wasn't just an old ruin. It was hard proof that monumental religion predated the very economy that was supposed to make it possible. Then came the bones, more than 100,000 fragments pulled from the fill and studied piece by piece, and every single one, wild, gazelle, wild boar, aurochs, red deer, wild ass, birds by the hundreds. Not one domesticated animal in the entire assemblage. If a farming society was hiding quietly in the background of Schmidt's story, waiting to be found, the evidence flatly refused to show it. Whoever built this had no herds, no flocks, no stored grain reserve to fall back on. Everything they ate, they hunted or gathered that same week, while also quarrying and hauling multi-ton stone across open ground. So how do you organize hundreds of hunter-gatherers, with no chief, no writing, no stored grain economy, to quarry, carve, and raise stones that weigh as much as a loaded truck? In 2012, researchers studying massive limestone troughs found at the site, some large enough to hold over 150 liters, found chemical residue consistent with fermenting wild cereal, probably beer or something close to it. Not proof of a brewery, proof of feasting, mass gatherings fueled by food and drink that could pull enough labor together for a few intense weeks of stonework, then disperse. No permanent city required, no standing army of laborers required, just enough incentive and enough shared belief to make hundreds of people show up and stay long enough to finish the job. Then came the discovery that made the site feel less like a temple and more like something with teeth. In 2017, researchers published findings on 3 human skulls recovered from the fill, carved with deliberate cross-hatched grooves running the length of the bone, one of them drilled clean through with a hole positioned so it could be hung upright, facing forward, on permanent display for whoever walked past it. The first documented evidence of what's now called a Neolithic skull cult, thousands of years earlier than any previously known example anywhere in the world. Ancestor worship, trophy display, a boundary marker between the living and the dead. Nobody agrees which. The evidence proves the practice happened. It doesn't prove why. And once you know that detail, the blank-faced pillars standing watch over the enclosures stop feeling like decoration. They start feeling like witnesses. This is the point where the story starts attracting louder, wilder voices. Writers like Graham Hancock have pointed to Göbekli Tepe as proof of a lost, advanced Ice Age civilization, survivors of some earlier catastrophe who supposedly taught primitive hunter-gatherers how to build in stone. It's a seductive idea, and it found a huge audience through a Netflix series that put the theory in front of millions of viewers who had never heard the site's name before. It's seductive because the achievement really does look advanced for people this old. Mainstream archaeologists reject it outright, and not out of stubbornness. There's no lost city buried underneath, no advanced tool marks that don't match known Neolithic flint technology, no unexplained materials. Just the accumulated skill of people the theory quietly writes off as too simple to have done this themselves, which, critics point out, is its own quiet kind of erasure. A more technical version of the same instinct came from engineer Martin Sweatman, who argued in 2017 that the animal carvings on one particular pillar, foxes, a scorpion, a vulture, actually encode a star map, marking the exact date of a catastrophic comet impact around 10,950 BCE. It's a striking claim, built on real astronomical calculation, and one the excavation team pushed back on hard, calling the interpretation far-fetched, and pointing out that the date Sweatman proposed comes centuries before the enclosure's own confirmed construction date. In 2024, Sweatman returned with a new argument, that the same markings function as a solar calendar, tracking a 365-day year in notches cut into the stone. Archaeologists working the site disagreed again, warning that pulling a handful of symbols out of a much larger carved scene and building a calendar system on top of them isn't evidence. It's pattern matching, dressed up as decoding. The wilder theories don't hold. But the sober version of the mystery is stranger than it first appeared, because the temple, not a settlement theory, Schmidt built his career on has started cracking too. And this time from inside the excavation itself, not from outsiders with a theory to sell. Since 2015, new digging led by researcher Lee Clare and a new generation of Turkish archaeologists has pushed deeper into the site than Schmidt ever reached, and they found things that shouldn't exist in a pure ceremonial complex. Hearths, middens, full of discarded food waste built up gradually over repeated use, not a single event. Cisterns cut directly into the bedrock to catch and store rainwater, engineering that only makes sense if people stayed long enough to need a reliable water supply, thousands of grinding tools for processing wild grain, in numbers that suggest routine daily use, not occasional ceremony. The evidence increasingly suggests people weren't just visiting Gobekli Tepe for festivals. Some of them may have been living there, at least seasonally, right alongside the stone rings once thought too sacred for daily life to touch. This wasn't a footnote correction buried in an academic journal. It was a direct reversal of the theory that made the site world famous in the first place. And the man who convinced the world this was purely a temple never lived to see the evidence that complicated his own conclusion. Even the deliberate burial theory, the idea that each enclosure was intentionally sealed as a ritual act, a clean and symbolic ending performed on purpose, is being challenged. Newer analysis of the fill suggests some of it may simply be debris that slid downhill from higher ground, possibly triggered by earthquakes, rather than one organized burial event carried out by human hands with intention behind every basket of rubble. It would explain something that always felt odd. Several central pillars found leaning in the exact same direction, as if knocked over together by a single violent event, not laid to rest gently over time by careful, ceremonial hands. None of this makes Gobekli Tepe less remarkable. If anything, it makes the achievement heavier. These weren't mysterious outsiders performing rituals and vanishing back into the desert. They may have been ordinary people, living, eating, grinding grain, and raising 10-ton stones as part of daily life, on a scale nobody thought hunter-gatherers were organizationally capable of. The mystery didn't get smaller once the real science arrived. It got more human, and somehow that made it stranger, not simpler. Fame brought its own conflict, the kind that has nothing to do with archaeology and everything to do with money, tourism, and reputation. In 2018, Klaus Schmidt's widow publicly accused site managers of damaging the excavation with concrete and heavy machinery during walkway construction meant to make the site easier for tourists to walk through. Turkish officials denied it outright, and the dispute was never fully resolved in public. It's a reminder that even a monument 11,000 years old isn't safe from the pressures of the present, where a viral tourist destination and a fragile, still unfinished excavation site are, uncomfortably, the exact same patch of ground, fought over by people with very different priorities. And Göbekli Tepe, it turns out, was never alone out there. A wider excavation effort called Tas Tepeler, Stone Hills, is now uncovering a network of roughly a dozen related sites across the same province, all part of the same lost cultural world that stretched further than anyone originally assumed. Karahan Tepe, Sayburg. Places with their own carved pillars, their own narrative reliefs, their own unresolved questions, all raised by communities that apparently knew about each other, traded ideas, maybe even competed for the biggest stone or the sharpest carving. In 2022, researchers at one of these sites uncovered a carved bench relief showing what's been called the oldest known narrative scene ever found in the region, a man facing down a charging wild bull, carved into stone as a sequence, telling a story with no writing available to explain what it meant. In 2023, researchers uncovered a painted boar statue inside one of Gobekli Tepe's own enclosures, the first known painted sculpture from this entire era anywhere in the world, faint traces of red, white, and black pigment still clinging to the stone after 11,000 years buried underground. And at Karahan Tepe, they found a 2-meter statue of a seated man gripping his own ribs, and then in 2025, the first confirmed human face ever carved directly onto a T-shaped pillar, physical proof, finally, that these abstract stone shapes really were meant to represent people all along, and had been the entire time. Less than 10% of Gobekli Tepe has actually been excavated. 90% still sits under the earth, unopened, unread, protected now by a steel canopy built specifically to shield it from the same rain and wind that buried it in the first place, 11,000 years ago. Every year, hundreds of thousands of visitors walk the platform above that unexcavated ground, staring down at pillars that took 30 years just to be correctly recognized for what they were, and further decades of digging just to be understood, even partially. Which means the story you just heard isn't finished. It's a chapter, not an ending. Somewhere beneath that hillside, more enclosures wait, sealed by rubble, or rockfall, or ritual. Nobody is fully certain which, and the answer seems to change depending on which excavation season you happen to ask. Every pillar pulled out of the ground so far has done the exact same thing, answered one question, and opened 3 more in its place. The timeline of civilization didn't just get older, it got rewritten. By the same hillside, a farmer's plow kept striking for years before anyone believed him. And by a hole in the ground that a 30-year-old academic report got flatly, confidently, professionally wrong. Stand at the railing today and look down into that pit, and you're not looking at a solved mystery. You're looking at a blank stone face, staring up out of the dust, that has been waiting 11,600 years for someone to finally ask it the right question. If you think there's something buried in that other 90% that could rewrite this timeline all over again, tell me what you think it is, and subscribe for when they finally dig it up.